You see the headlines, you hear about the conflicts, but to really understand the man who has so dramatically reshaped our world, you've got to go back, way back. We're going to trace the key moments, the core beliefs, and the absolutely unbelievable rise of Vladimir Putin. We're going to see how one man's past literally became the world's present.
Okay, so picture this. It's December 1989 in Dresden, East Germany. The Berlin Wall has just come crashing down and chaos is everywhere. An angry mob storms the secret police headquarters, and then they turn their attention to the KGB building right next door. Inside, a young intelligence officer is frantically calling Moscow, asking for orders, begging for backup, but all he gets is silence. Crickets. Moscow is silent, and in that moment he felt like the entire empire he had sworn to serve just abandoned him.
You know that feeling, that experience of being left behind as everything collapsed? That became a defining trauma for him. It planted a seed, an idea that would grow into his core mission, to never let Russia be weak or humiliated ever again. So the big question is, how did that lone, forgotten KGB officer become the man we see today?
Well, to get that answer, we have to rewind even further. We're going to the tough, gritty streets of post-war Leningrad, because it was right here, long before he ever joined the KGB, that Vladimir Putin learned the fundamental rules that would guide him for the rest of his life.
And let's be clear, this was not a privileged childhood, by any stretch. Born in 1952, he grew up in a single room inside a communal apartment, the kind with shared kitchens and bathrooms, a world of constant struggle. And out on the streets, he was a small kid, always having to defend himself against bigger, tougher boys just to get by. That kind of environment teaches you a pretty brutal, unforgettable lesson about power.
In fact, there's this one story he tells from his childhood that just perfectly captures his whole mindset. He says he chased the rat into a corner in his building, and with nowhere left to go, what did the rat do? It didn't surrender. It lunged right back at him, forcing him to run. The lesson stuck with him forever, and it basically became his motto. If a fight is inevitable, you must strike first.
But here's the thing. Raw aggression will only get you so far. So he channeled that instinct into martial arts, specifically Sambo and Judo. And this is what's so interesting, right? It created this duality in his character. The streets taught him aggression and survival, sure. But Judo, that taught him discipline, calculated strategy, and how to use an opponent's own strength against them. It was all about control, not just pure force.
And it was that disciplined mindset that led him straight to his childhood dream, joining the KGB. For him, this was the ultimate way to serve a strong, powerful state. The only problem? The state he swore to protect was about to completely dissolve, right before his very eyes.
So, in 1985, he gets his posting to Dresden. Now, it wasn't a top-tier assignment, not like Berlin or anything, but it put him right on the front lines of the Cold War. And then, in just a few short years, he had a front-row seat to watch that entire world crumble. The wall falls, protests are everywhere, and by 1991, the Soviet Union itself, poof, it's just gone. For Putin, this wasn't some great liberation. Nope, it was the ultimate humiliation.
And trust me, he has never, ever minced words about this. This famous quote pretty much says it all. He didn't see the collapse of the USSR as some kind of victory for freedom or the West. He saw it as a massive, tragic disaster that left Russia weak, poor, and totally disrespected. And correcting what he saw as that catastrophe, well, that would become his entire life's work.
So after the KGB collapses, he goes back to a Russia that's in total turmoil. I mean, think about it. He was a man without a country, a spy without a mission. But he was not going to stay in the shadows for long. In fact, his rise from total obscurity to the very top of the Kremlin is one of the most just wild political stories of our time.
He got his start back in St. Petersburg politics working for the mayor. But he wasn't the guy out front giving speeches, oh no. He was the guy behind the curtain, the one quietly making things happen. He even earned a nickname for it, the Grand Eminence. That powerful advisor who operates behind the scenes. And that preference for quiet, backstage influence, that's a trait he has never, ever lost.
The speed of what happens next is, honestly, it's just staggering. Check this out. In 1996, he lands a mid-level job in Moscow. By August of 1999, just 3 years later, an ailing President Yeltsin makes this virtual nobody his prime minister. Yeltsin was looking for a loyal successor, someone who would protect him. And then it gets crazier. Just a few months later, on New Year's Eve 1999, Yeltsin makes a shock announcement and resigns. And just like that, Vladimir Putin is the acting president of Russia. So, okay, taking power is one thing. But holding on to it, that's a whole different ballgame. The Russia he inherited was a mess, basically run by a handful of super powerful billionaires who were calling all the shots.
Putin's very first move was to change that, and he did it immediately and, well, ruthlessly.
So who were these oligarchs? Well, they were the guys who got incredibly rich during the chaos of the 1990s, basically snapping up all of Russia's most valuable stuff, oil, gas, you name it, for pennies on the dollar. And this wasn't just about being rich. It was about raw political power. They owned TV stations, they controlled politicians, they had pretty much privatized the Russian state. And for a guy like Putin, who believed the state should be all-powerful, this was a massive threat to everything he wanted to build.
So he basically offered them a deal. It was brutally simple. He gathered the most powerful oligarchs in a room and laid down the new rules. The deal was this: you can keep your money, but you must stay out of politics. Period. The state is back in charge now. But the ones who went along with it, they did just fine. But those who defied him, well, guys like the oil tycoon Mikhail Khodorkovsky ended up in prison or forced into exile. The message was sent, loud and clear.
At the exact same time, he got a major dose of luck. Global oil prices went through the roof, which flooded Russia with cash. Suddenly, pensions were getting paid on time, living standards were going up, and all that chaos of the 90s started to feel like a bad dream. For millions of regular Russians, Putin was delivering on his promise. He brought them stability, order, and a real sense of restored national pride.
So, with his power locked down at home, he turned his focus outward. It was time to fulfill that mission that was born all the way back in that office in Dresden, to restore Russia's place as a major global power, a power that could never be ignored or abandoned again.
And this really brings us to the core of his worldview today. First, he sees NATO's expansion eastward as a direct threat, not defensive, but an attack on Russia's rightful sphere of influence. He also sees himself in historic terms, like a modern-day Peter the Great, a gatherer of Russian lands. And underlying all of it is this deep, deep distrust of the West. He relies on a tiny inner circle of old security guys like him. They're called the Siloviki, which literally means men of force. When you look at his actions today, you can see all those core traits, forged over a lifetime, playing out. You've got the calculated patience of the judo master, just waiting for the right moment to make a move. You've got the deep distrust of the old KGB officer, who sees threats around every corner. And then you have the high-stakes risk-taking of that street fighter who believes you have to strike first. And that's the philosophy that has guided everything, from Chechnya to Crimea and to, well, to where we are today. So really, when you see Vladimir Putin on the world stage today, you're not just seeing a president. You're seeing the culmination of everything we've talked about. You're seeing the kid from the communal apartment, the spy abandoned in Dresden, the quiet gray eminence, and the man who tamed the oligarchs. Every single step of that journey informs the decisions he makes right now.
And all of this leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? Savior or dictator? To his supporters, he's the man who saved Russia from total collapse. To his critics, he's a ruthless autocrat tearing down the global order. But here's what's certain. The lessons he learned as a boy in the streets of Leningrad and as a spy left behind in Dresden, those are the exact same rules he's playing by on the world stage today.